Good afternoon, everybody. I will just wait a couple of moments to let people in to the webinar. In advance, happy Women's Day. I'll just wait 1 minute and then we'll start. Hopefully everybody's brought their lunch along. You can sit and just have a bite to eat while you listen to these amazing panelists.
Or their breakfast, if they're in the West, maybe.
Or if you're in Vegas, your dinner.
Yeah.
Or your cocktails.
Yeah, I just like cocktails are waiting, Sal, not yet. Yeah. It's good. I mean, whilst we can see the names, I know what the faces look like for many, and I'm really happy to see you all here.
I know, we'll see your smile get bigger as more and more names pop up on the screen. We know what you're like, Aileen.
I know. Proud mama. Okay.
Right. You know what? We might start just in the interest of we've got a lot we want to cover, and people can just jump in as they arrive. Okay, so I guess firstly a couple of things. I don't want to take too long because this is not about me. This is about our panel and talking about the topics this year. But I just wanted to say that, sorry, I'm multitasking by clicking all these messages as they pop up. I guess for me, International Women's Day gives us the chance to just sit and spend a few minutes to reflect. And I guess it's a couple of things. It's reflecting on where we've come from, where we're at today, and where we want to go to. And this year's themes, I think, work really nicely with some of the other activities that we're doing as an industry and with the HRIA, our Women in Hire program in particular. So the themes today, the UN theme is balancing the scales, which I think everybody in this room probably thinks is super important, and probably has stories of when scales haven't been balanced. And then also the second theme being give to gain. So we're going to cover off both of those. We will ask anyone who has any questions as the session goes on to pop them in the chat. So you'll see the chat button at the top. We've got Amanda, myself, and Lisa that can watch that chat. And we'll have a look and we'll see whether we want to interrupt the conversation and ask the question there or save them to the end. So Aileen's going to facilitate the session today. I'm pretty sure everybody knows Aileen from Strategic Alignment Training. So I just thought we'd take a couple of minutes for our panelists. We've got Penny, Kate, Chi, and then obviously Aileen as the facilitator, just to take a couple of minutes to introduce themselves and explain why participating in a panel on a day like International Women's Day is important to them. So we might start with Penny.
Thanks, Penny.
Thanks, Sally. Welcome, everybody, from beautiful sunny Port Fairy. I'm down here in a beautiful backdrop, but I'm actually, believe it or not, sitting here at a campsite. I'll just about to go to a folk festival, and we were talking before about I'm probably living proof that, you can work flexibly and you can do work from anywhere. I'm sitting at a campsite as we speak. So I'm Penny. I'm very honoured to be here today. International Women's Day is extremely important to me because I think it is an opportunity to bring focus to something that still needs a hell of a lot of focus. According to the UN, at the current pace of change, we're likely to realise gender parity by, I think it's another 130 years. Which I find extremely disturbing, given most of us know the effort and energy that goes behind trying to create parity. So in terms of who I am many things, but I suppose what's probably most of interest to those of you here today, I'm a behavioural scientist. I am a provisional psychologist about to finish my master's in psychology at the age of 50 years old. I'm also an international speaker. I'm a published researcher and author, and I'm extremely passionate about helping women realise the impact that they want to make in the world and change their behaviour in the everyday to actually enable them to make that happen, whether that's at home with their children or whether that's out on a stage somewhere or somewhere in a workplace. That's a little about me.
Amazing. Thank you. We'll go to Kate next.
Hi everyone, my name is Kate Melville. I'm the head of HR at Adapt to Lift Group. My career's always been in HR, so I've been doing this type of role for nearly 20 years now. However, always been in blue collar type environments and industries. So started my career in transport, FMCG, automotive, and then spent the last 13 years at Adaptalift Group, which is where I've really cut my teeth at a lot of the topics that we're going to talk about today as well. So I guess, you know, being early career, being young female in HR, certainly had some challenges that I faced back then, which, you know, is big part of who I am today as well. So we'll talk to that today, but also I have a side hustle as a mum of 2 kids, Lucy and Charlie, who are 6 and 8. I think she and I have similar age children as well. And certainly with that comes all the challenges of being a working parent, but also being an executive leader. So always a struggle to juggle, as many people are aware of as well themselves. And so it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about in terms of supporting working parents across our workforce and our industry. And when I say working parents, I was purposeful about that word, because I mean both genders. And certainly as a industry where, you know, traditionally we are male dominated, is ensuring, you know, some of the balancing the scales is actually around balancing our workforce and supporting both parents to be able to, you know, co-parent effectively as well. Being an executive leader and a working parent, I've also worked part-time for the last 7 years, 3 days a week for a big chunk of that, and 4 days in the last 2 years. So I also have a bit of a lens around how you can juggle exec roles part-time. If anyone wants to reach out to me and ask me how to do it, I've got a couple of tips, but certainly, yeah, I come, I guess, from a few different lenses when I talk passionately about, you know, balancing the scales and hoping that, you know, we get to a point where my children don't have to talk about this in 20 years' time when they hit the workforce.
Thank you, Kate. And for those, many of you in Victoria may know that Kate has been a mentor supporting the Women in Hire program. For others that don't, that's another role that Kate plays. Thanks.
Yes, I forgot that hat, sorry.
Yeah, no, you've got many.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, Kate, like I love all the different angles you were talking about, but I think the parent one is an interesting one, because I think everyone first thinks about it as, how do I juggle the being a parent, but also the setting example for the kids as well, which I think is super important. And I know that you will talk to that today as well.
Yes, my kids have some interesting stories about what mummy does for work.
Okay,
great.
we'll go to Chi now.
Hi guys, I'm Chi. So I'm a Chief Operating Officer at RPM Hire, which is a national traffic equipment hire business. So I've spent the last 15 years in construction, working across finance and operations and exec leadership roles. So my career path wasn't exactly traditional, because I started as a chartered accountant at KPMG, and I did 5 years there. And just something about, you know, those company tax return, drafting that tax advice just wasn't hitting it for me. So I ended up putting on the tiniest pair of builder's boots and got myself registered as a builder. And I loved it. I loved everything about the industry across construction and hire. I just found the industry never stands still. There's always an opportunity to learn, a problem to solve, something, you know, and a way to grow. I like to think of our industry as not male dominated, but male only. I get my renewed registration every year for my building license, and sometimes it's a Mr. Chi Shankar, because it couldn't be a miss with a building license. So I think it is very much, yeah, still even more so than male dominated. It's still mostly men, which I find is a great challenge, but obviously one of the reasons we're here today. I'm also a mum of 2, as Kate mentioned, and yeah, definitely experienced firsthand at sort of balancing between leadership, career, and family. And in terms of the 2 topics we've got, balancing the scales, I sort of was reading through all the questions, thinking about it, brought the questions on the plane with me, you know, had a good think when I was in the US on a recent work trip. And I realized that, yes, I spent a lot of my career trying to balance the scales by just being better and better and better and trying to prove myself. But really, as a topic, balancing the scales is, you know, being able to give pathways and opportunities, you know. So now that we as women can be in those leadership roles, we had to, you know, and not to say that that doesn't happen anymore, but, you know, we felt like just proving ourselves was the way. But now going forward, we have this opportunity to balance the scales by providing those pathways, giving those opportunities, mentoring, especially now there are, women in leadership that can provide those mentoring opportunities and make sure the talent is visible across our industry. And I guess that sort of feeds quite well into the give to gain, because, we've been given something to get to where we are by people around us. And, I feel that's really important for us to be able to give back to that next generation and that emerging leaders that are coming through. So I like those two topics and how they intertwine today.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chi. I think our biggest challenge is honestly going to be able to keep on time today, because we have got incredible panelists. And I know that you'll have plenty of questions. You may have already come along with some questions, and we want this to be really free flowing. We've obviously got some questions that we want to put onto ask the panel to think about and to respond to, but it's your session. So please use the for the chat room or the question, whichever way it is. If you're having any challenges with that, Amanda and Lisa would be able to guide you through that as Sal and I sort of facilitate the questions or the responses to those. But thank you very much. Happy International Women's Day. I am in the States at the moment in Las Vegas, and tomorrow morning, it's Friday here tomorrow, I'm going to a program called Empower Her, and I'm going to take away from that a lot of things, no doubt, but I'm actually going in there and feeling so proud of what we do in Australia and what we've done in the hire and rental industry to support the careers of women. And as early as today, without giving away names, we had an email of someone who talked us through the journey that they've arrived to recently, that they would not have arrived to without the connection, the support, and just being in a room with other women and just knowing, and men too. I have to remember, and definitely it's important to us that we are so incredibly supported by some fabulous men throughout the program. So if you haven't quite looked at all the names yet, but if you're one of those amazing men to support, we want your questions as well. All right, so the way that we will do it is we'll keep it sort of flowing, and we'll ask some questions, and then for yourself, Penny, Kate and Chi, if you want to just sort of jump in or add on to, please feel free to do that. So rather than me directing a question at you individually, I'm just going to pop the question out there, and whilst we might get a little bit of answering at the one time, we'll get through it. So let's get started. With the first question, I'm going to sort of look at the balancing the scales. So thinking about yourself in terms of balancing the scales. And I think we have come a long way in the hire and rental industry. I was reflecting on this with a client that I have that is very male dominated, and going back, had that client for 7 years. And I thought about when I first was meeting with managers inside that environment, and how much those conversations have changed in the 7 years, and it will probably continue to do that. But where do we still need, right off the bat, where do we still need to sort of support the tipping of the scales further inside our industry? And Penny, I'd love to know your take on it from external to that. So what else do we need to do to balance those scales? Let's start with a big question, and then we'll narrow some down. What do you think? What's your thoughts around it? Who would like to start the ball rolling rather?
I can talk a little bit about some research that I
Thanks.
did that I think, whilst it's not industry specific, it's so basically some research that I did a year ago was it was called Hidden Figures, Where Are All the Female Experts? And one of the things that I found profoundly interesting working with female leaders was how few of them would actually call themselves experts in their field. And so I went out and spoke to roughly around 25 female leaders across industry. And what I found was that most women actually feel an ick with the word expert. And therefore what happens is we see women actually will not publicly call themselves, be that in a meeting, be that on a stage, be that anywhere, an expert, even when they are experts in their field. And I'm always about, so yeah, what can we do ourselves to actually, shift the dynamic and balance the scales, that it's like low-hanging fruit. And so from that research, what we found was that because women have an ick with the word expert, and equally as we know from other research in the past, we found that women won't actually call themselves experts until they've ticked every box. And then when I asked women, what are the boxes you need to tick in order to be an expert in your field? What do you think they came back and said? I don't know. So how the hell do you ever be the thing when you don't even know what the boxes are that you're trying to tick to be the thing? And so this is the reason why we have such a a low representation of women, be it as experts in the media. So, for example, think about the construction and hire industry. When there's a voice in the media, I'll guarantee you it's likely a male's voice in terms of an expert perspective on the industry. And we see that I think it's something like less than 24% of female voices, 24% of voices in the media are female, and less than 17% of expert voices on stages globally are female. And I see this as a huge opportunity. So one of the things that I think we can do as women is actually, one, start owning our expertise publicly and saying, I am an expert in this field, because we know many other people will actually call themselves an expert with less skills and less qualifications. Okay. And the second thing that is really powerful in this space, which was one of the recommendations of the white paper, and I will drop a link to the white paper for anyone who's interested, because some really practical tips on how you can actually own your expertise. But for those who are advocates, and equally for other women, one of the most powerful things you can do is call out another woman as an expert. And we all know them, and I guarantee that they won't do it themselves. So whether that's on LinkedIn, calling out female, whether that's in a meeting and deferring to say, oh, I actually know Kate is the expert in this field from a HR perspective in our industry. So that would be something I think that's very simple that we can all do to start to make a shift and actually elevate ourselves and our expertise to gain higher profile and visibility of our skills, and then therefore the opportunities that come with that.
Oh, that's amazing. And if you're sitting there wondering whether you find that a bit icky, I'd love to know in the chat, just so that we can kind of see if that is something inside this group. What a great insight, and love those practical tips. If you could put that white paper in there, that would, I'm sure, would be useful. Absolutely. Someone said something to me yesterday, and I'm interested, and maybe Kate or Chi can add to this, is that when a female is provided, it gets a new role, she has to prove a competence. And when a male gets that same new role, he has to prove that he's incompetent.
I was actually just going to add some flavour to
thanks.
that anyway. From a recruitment point of view, is similar data, Penny, is there's so much research around recruitment. So when it comes to a job ad, the tendencies of a woman to, I don't tick all those boxes, so I won't apply for that. Whereas our male counterparts, and this is not everyone, but obviously on a research point of view, our male counterparts will go, oh yeah, I tick 50% of those, we'll just chuck it in and see what happens. Yeah. So it's that level of confidence going, I'm not ticking all the boxes. What's the worst that could happen? If we're not putting ourselves out there, if we're actually not including ourselves in those processes, in those roles, in those, whether it's an internal role or with another organisation, we're actually selling ourselves short as well. So it's also not only putting yourself out there as the experts, as Penny's called out, but also as the people that are the best people for the role, and you can grow into a role without ticking all the boxes.
Thank you, Kate. That's great. Chi, I'm guessing you've gone for roles when you haven't ticked all the boxes. Would I be right?
I think I've always just ended up going to those roles, but I think the one I feel like was the most challenging to kind of go into before I was definitely not ready on any level, especially emotionally, was, when I went for my building license, because I felt like such an imposter. I'm from a professional background. I grew up, very much academic, never had like a tradie dad that would take me to sites or anything. So it was so foreign to me, and it felt, even when I tell people, I couldn't say it with confidence. And it really showed up when I went for the first time I went for the assessment, I failed. And, I was really devastated because, I don't fail a test. I'm pretty good academically. I should have passed this. What happened? And just so devastated. But it sort of changed my whole outlook, because, I had to live in that failure, and then I had to figure out, well, what am I going to do about it? And so I went out on site. I had to put myself out there, which was so uncomfortable. Going onto a construction site, especially being the only female, but just being very different overall. And then going there and asking people for help. Hey, can you teach me this? I don't know the answer. And, the response, which was all men, by the way, the response was so friendly, so open, so helpful, no judgment, and that sort of told me that I could always go for something that I didn't know how to do, because you would just figure it out. But that was so unnatural that happened, that I could have plodded along life just doing everything that felt comfortable. And, even now, like when you're saying, you're not an expert, like it took me 6 years to be in the crane industry. And I'd still feel weird when people would say, oh, you know, you're the CEO at Premier Cranes, you're obviously an expert in cranes. No, I'm not an expert in cranes. No, that's that person over there. I'm just in the industry, you know? So I definitely understand that feeling of like, when are you an expert, you know? When do we give ourselves that license? And I think part of that is like being okay with being uncomfortable with what that might mean, and being okay with the fact that you don't have to know the answer to every single thing that you're an expert in to be an expert, and therefore maybe you are an expert. You know, like I actually technically don't know a lot as much about cranes as every other crane owner, but it doesn't mean I'm not an expert in the industry, because I can tell you how it works, how to win contracts, who the stakeholders are, how to run a project end to end, who needs to be involved. You know, I should see myself as an expert, but that, you know, doubt in my mind is, oh, but if someone asked me, you know, how far the crane could reach at this capability, I couldn't answer it, you know? And I think that, yeah, that's, I don't know if it's a woman thing, but it's that doubt of, well, I can't answer every question, and being okay with that.
So that was something, just to touch on, that came out in the research, exactly that. So one of the sort of the key themes that came out was I'm afraid. And what we found was that fear of criticism and being exposed as an imposter was one of the greatest barriers to women actually owning their voice and their power publicly for impact, or owning their expertise. So, you know, like you say, it's like the standard that we can hold ourselves to, whilst that is what makes us successful and great at our jobs, often that standard is so unrealistic. It means that we don't actually put ourselves in these positions where the opportunities exist. There's two other things I want to touch on that you said, though, that I think are really powerful to this conversation. One is failure. And I think, again, you know, a lot of us as women are people-pleasing perfectionists. You know, we like to get things right before we put ourselves out there. And one of the things that I found most interesting when I started my journey as an entrepreneur was that in Silicon Valley, where all the big VCs reside in the world, venture capitalists will often only invest in a founder if they've failed twice before they give them funding, right?
Wow.
And I just think this is so interesting, because you look at companies like Google and you're like, oh, they must have landed it, got it right the first time, and then got all this funding and became, you know, a unicorn. It's not how it works. And the reason they look for founders who have failed twice before, because they say that it basically shows that they're resilient and they have the skills that are needed to actually be successful as someone in business. And I think that that's really interesting, because I think failure can be one of the greatest gifts, as you've just shared in your journey. And it's quite brave you sharing that, you know, you failed something as someone who prides themselves. Failure can be the greatest gift, because failure is where we learn the greatest lessons, and we can equally pivot and improve ourselves and grow from there. And one of the most beautiful practices that I share in this space with my clients and on the stages that I speak on is this practice of micro bravery. And so in order to get comfortable with failure, it's doing one small thing every day that makes you feel uncomfortable. Doesn't matter how tiny it is, right? Because what that does is it builds our confidence and courage over time, and our resilience to actually keep putting ourselves out there. Because often the fear in our heads of failure or getting it wrong or not being enough or not being ready is so much bigger than the reality of what we're going to receive in the real world. And what I see with most women who practice this micro bravery is often they actually receive more opportunities as a result of putting themselves into the discomfort daily and asking for the things that they want.
Oh, that's so powerful. And I know that one of the things that people fear is the word no, you know, getting a rejection. Penny, before we move on to the next question and the others to respond, do you mind sharing your little tip that you did with your clients around getting comfortable with no?
Yeah, so one of the things that I learned in my studies is this concept of rejection therapy. And many people haven't heard of it, but rejection therapy is one of the greatest gifts, right? So the more comfortable you get with rejection, I guarantee you the more opportunities you'll get. So this little practice is a beautiful example of how you can get comfortable with a no, because I always say you cannot get yeses unless you get nos, right? It is a numbers game. And what I see is most women won't ask for a no or a yes, be it either, because they're too afraid of getting rejected, right? So this practice is called 100 no's. It works. It's so damn effective. I guarantee you will not get to the 100. So you write 100 no's on a piece of paper, And your goal is to get out there and ask for all the things you've ever wanted but been too afraid to ask for. Now, here's the thing. Most women love a list, right? We love to tick things off. So every no you get, every rejection you get is a win because you get to tick it off your little 100 no's, right? Wonderful. But here's what happens. The more you put out into the world what you want, the impact you want to have, what your purpose is in life, right? The more other people, because we think people can read our minds, they can't. The more people understand what is meaningful and what is important to you in the context of your career, the more when the opportunities present, you're in their mind and they go, hang on a sec, I didn't have the opportunity for her. I had to give her a no. But you know what? Now she's actually top of mind and this opportunity's here. I'm going to go back and tell her it's a yes. So what happens is every no you get and tick off moves you closer to a bigger yes. And I guarantee you the yeses you will get as a result of this will blow your mind, because if you do not ask for the no's, you cannot get the yeses.
Oh, it's powerful. That's really
just
powerful.
Before we move off fear, though, I think all the coaching I've done of many women in our business over many years is the story in their head. So they've got themselves so worked up on the story in their head that I'm going to get this no from this person, that I'm going to go ask this question, that then they just don't ask it. And I always say, what's the worst that could happen? As Penny just said, you get no.
Yeah. And then you're one bit closer to a yes.
Those
Kate,
that
I'm
don't
imagining
ask, don't get.
Kate, in your role, head of HR, I'm imagining that you would have seen some biases. You know, you would have seen some unconscious or some conscious biases.
Yeah.
Have you ever had to challenge some of those biases? And if so, what did you learn? What did you learn from the biases and the challenging of those biases?
Oh, I could write a book.
Yeah.
It was funny when I was thinking about this morning. There's this really early career thing that happened to me, and before I'd had kids, I'll just preface this, it was not at Adaptalift. It was in an earlier role. I was in my early 20s, and the hiring manager, I had this great candidate. I put her forward. He'd interviewed her, and he said, "Yeah, no, I'm not going to go ahead with her. She's 23. She might have babies." And early career Kate, I was a little bit more outspoken in different ways than I was then now. And I think I wanted to slap him, first reaction, but certainly I managed to turn it into a coaching moment of some form, in terms of, I just remember looking at him horrified going, you realize that that's my age and I'm not having kids anytime soon. Like, what are you talking about? So it was an educational process with that person at the time. But fast forward to 2026, like, first of all, I'd be mortified to hear if that was still happening. However, yeah, certainly I think we play a role as all women around coaching and educating, because people don't necessarily, it's not that they don't mean well, it's just then it's unconscious. Some of the things more recently, and this would be something, there'd be a few cringes on this call, which is the admin girls. That one drives me crackers. It's really around, come on guys, let's broaden our vocabularies, addressing emails. Hi gents, and I'm on there. That one annoys me a lot. But again, it's not necessarily that people mean any malice by it, but it's actually calling it out every time you see it. And I think we all have a role to play in that. I'm not just calling out because I'm the head of HR. I'm calling it out because I see something and I'm like, hey, are you aware that when you do that, this is how it makes me feel? And 9 times out of 10, they've got no idea, and they really appreciate the feedback. So it's, again, if you don't say something, they'll keep doing it. So it is really important that at all levels that we are continually, if you're feeling like you're seeing any biased behaviour, that you hold up the mirror to it.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess it's I can imagine that one with hi gents. Like, it would be probably not the most appropriate to go back on that email, but to maybe to that person directly, rather than sort of feeling like you're shaming them or so on.
I prefer hi team.
Yeah, hi team. Yeah, that's no hi team.
It's a good alternative.
There was recently a lady put on her Instagram taking her her son rather, to a construction site, and she said, if you want to have peace and quiet, bring your boys here. And it was funny because I'd not recently taken my little granddaughter to a site that's going on around the corner. So I just innocently said, or you can take your girls too, they love it. And that was a few months ago. And every so often I get this pop-up of abuse to me saying, oh, you're giving you a hard time and all these things. So it was obviously not the most appropriate way that I did it, but I didn't mean it in that malice way. I just meant it as it's a great thing to do with girls as well. But it still keeps coming back to me. In fact, earlier yesterday, I got one ranting at me for my disrespect to to people. But anyway,
even just some of our traditional position titles, salesman, storeman. Obviously, we don't call them that in our organisation, but sometimes people's language just slips into that because it is traditionally what those roles were called.
Yeah, that's right.
It's interesting.
Chief, for you, have you had to challenge any biases, and what did you learn from that? Thanks.
I think it's something I'm probably continuing. I continue to sort of have it time to time, which now maybe I'm a bit more flattered. But when I was younger, because I look young, I was young, and I was, general manager, when I was mid-20s, right? And I had this project coordinator when I was in steel, and he was the same age as me. He was balding, so he looked older than me, and would go to construction sites, would be tendering for a job, and they'd always just ask him all the questions. And he was fairly new to project management, so he was quite, he was like a deer in the headlights. And then, I was answering all the questions like, yeah, we'll do this, and we're working on this. This is our lead time. And, that take 5 or 10 minutes, and they kind of realize, oh, she's in charge. And then they'll turn to me and start working with me on it. And in my head, I was like, challenge accepted. So I used to just look at the time to see how long it would take them to realize I was in charge. And I guess what I found was quite supportive was like, after a few times, Andrew turned to me and he's like, Chi, do you notice that the guys are always looking at me for the answers? And just, I guess that acknowledgement from him, being my colleague, my friend, but also man, are going, hey, men are treating you this way. And so even recently, because I guess I still look young, which is why I'm saying it's a compliment now, but whenever I go to meetings with Ash, our CEO, he's really conscious if anyone doesn't include me in the conversation, or if they kind of just focus on him. Like we were doing these tenders we're looking for a new accountant, like an external accountant, and we did a big, they were pitching to us, and we had about 5 companies, and one company he just about wrote off because he got out of there, and he's like, Chi, did you notice they were directing everything at me, and you're the accountant here, what's going on here? And just calling it out like, oh, I didn't like that, obviously you're a big part of the future engagement. So, and I think in his head, he was like, well, I don't like this, I'm not going to prioritize this as a firm that we can work with. And I guess that's the support when you've got the bias and you see, well, there's men around that notice it, don't like it, won't stand for it. That kind of makes you realize, well, the world is turning, the world is changing. There is that bias out there, but there's so many people, so many men that are actually conscious of it and supportive of turning that around. And that's what's really lovely to see.
Yeah, that's great.
So, Chi,
Penny, did you want to add? Yeah, sorry, I was just going to ask Penny, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to build on what Chi said. So a story that I read a while back, which I love. So it is a known phenomenon where what you're talking about, Chi, happens in terms of a bias where, and I've had so many women that have been uber successful that have been, say, business partners as entrepreneurs with men, and the same thing, they'll be in a room and the male will sit there as the business partner and go, I can't answer that. You need to ask her. She's the expert. And they continue still to ask the male the questions, right? So it's ingrained. But there was this beautiful story that came out of when Obama was in administration, and I don't know if anyone knows this, where basically there was other research that they found that where women had great ideas in meetings and put them forward, often what would happen would be 5 or 10 minutes later, a man would say the same thing and he would be credited with the idea and cheered on and celebrated for such a brilliant idea, and it would be completely forgotten, like erased from people's mind that the woman had even mentioned it. And so what the Obama administration did was every time, because it was a known phenomenon, every time a woman in a meeting, and this is an opportunity for everyone here, comes up with an idea, because this is a known bias, one of the most powerful things you can do, and they did it, was that someone else in the room would basically acknowledge and say the same idea and credit it to the woman so that it didn't get credited to someone else later. And I think that's such a small thing that we can do, right? But when a woman puts an idea in the room, for the male advocates that we have, one of the most, in this room today, one of the most powerful things they can do is repeat what the woman said, acknowledge that it's the woman's idea and try and elevate the idea for conversation, because that attributes it then to the women and not to someone else owning it and bringing the same idea up 5 minutes later and getting the credit for it.
Oh, because that does happen, and depending on lots of different rooms. But so it kind of leads me to thinking about a question for you as the panel is: has there been a time when you've seen that sort of situation potentially when someone hasn't been credited, and you've had to call it out and it hasn't been the most easy conversation to have? How did you go about that? Did you do it? Did you not do it? Did you voice up? Was it difficult? Just want to hear about that. So when you've seen those kind of biases that may be happening, what have you
I might
done?
jump in with an example. I've definitely seen that phenomenon play out in boardrooms before, and it gives you the icks because you're just watching going, did that just happen? I think sometimes it's a bit of shock when it happens. You're just like, what? Didn't you just say that? But in a slightly different way, and it's celebrated down this end of the table. I think I actually interacted with a post on LinkedIn this week that talked about labelling outspoken women as difficult women, which underneath all that, we know that it just means that you're using your voice and you're speaking, and it might not be the popular comment at the table either. So I've certainly seen that play out where a woman was labelled as more like the way she said it was, and she was trying to probably speak like a man a little bit, and it was agitating the room, whereas then it turned up at the other end of the table and it was, oh yeah, well done, and it was effectively the same thing but just said differently. So I think that sort of label of how we actually convey that message or that idea, I think, is also really important, and making sure that that message is going to land in that room, but equally making sure that we do put our hand up and actually say it too. Because I think I saw in the chat, Nicola, who's in my team, has made a really good point around sometimes the men in the room are the loudest as well. So this is almost sometimes a little bit of that introvert extrovert thing. And as a flaming extrovert myself, I try to be quite conscious of it too, because I don't want to be taking away from someone else's message either. But it's also, it's not always about being the loudest in the room, but it's about being, conveying something competently and expertly, as Penny would say, using your expert opinion. But making sure, I think, to Penny's point, is that if you see it, you do call it out. And that's a bit of advice, Penny, around, well, let's repeat. I had just heard Aileen say, I think that's a great idea, and kind of put your support behind it as well.
Yeah, that's great.
I think, Eileen, the other thing we need to call out here as well, but bias is it's really easy to see the bias in others, but equally we have bias in ourselves. And I think the greatest example I've seen of this is there's a known bias called the authority gap. And what will happen, it's a bit like the job thing that Kate was talking about, where if you have a male and a female that are equally qualified to do or to be something, right? Or no, say the male has less qualifications and the female has more, but they're in the same sort of area and same sort of skill base, the male, even if it's a woman looking at the man, will still be perceived as a higher authority on whatever that thing is, whatever that topic is, than the female. And again, it's a condition of, the patriarchy, the environment that we live in, where we have an unconscious bias because it's what we see in the media, it's what, we've grown up with, where the male, just by the nature of being male, is considered to be a higher authority on things. And that is, like I say, it's equally women, whether it's a woman or a man, making the judgment.
What can we do, Penny? Like, what can we do? And I 100% agree that it's sometimes I fly a lot, and I've told this story before, and it really does make me feel uncomfortable, but it happened and it was true for me. Two incredibly competent, no doubt, female pilots joined the plane, and I fly all the time, and I was like, shit, excuse my language, but I had a moment. I had a moment where and this is someone that is really truly believes in inclusivity and supporting, and I had a moment. It was only literally a moment, but it took my back, really took me back, and I thought, what is it? And it's, we don't see it every day, so we don't relate. It's not just, it doesn't just pass by us. What do we do? So, Penny,
That's a great story, Eileen. That's a great story. And it's an example of what we need to do, right? So the first thing is, I always say, without awareness, there can be no change. So the only way that you can change a bias is, and this is why I say start with the self, is like you've just done, be aware of the bias that you have within. So you have a bias where you think for some reason that females, because you don't see female pilots, are less competent than men. The reality is we are meaning-making machines, right? And that meaning comes from our lived experiences, the stories we then tell ourselves about that lived experiences, the beliefs that we have, the values. It all comes from our journeys through life, right? And so one of the most powerful things is, one, notice that you have a bias, which you've just done. And two, ask yourself, what is the story I'm telling myself? And where does that story come from? Because I'll guarantee you, and so that story must come from as a child, or when I first started flying, I only ever saw men. So therefore, the story is men must be the only people that can do this job. And whether that's conscious or unconscious, that's probably, in its essence, some of the story that lives in your head. So just being aware, calling it out, asking yourself where the story comes from, and then saying to yourself, what would be a different story that I could tell myself? Because the reality is, of every situation we are in, be it good or bad, there are always two ways we can look at it, from a constructive or a destructive way. And I challenge you, one of the most powerful things you can do when things are shitty or when you have a bias is say, right, if this is the story I'm telling myself, what would be the alternate story? And that's the basis of cognitive behavioural therapy, which is one of the most effective forms of therapy in the world. It's reframing the stories that live in our head and bringing into our neural pathways a new story, a different way to look at the world, right? Because the meaning we make puts blinkers on us, and basically we wear our glasses that make us see the world in a certain way, and that way it might be our reality, but it's not reality, right? It's like not everybody else's, because everyone else has a different perspective.
That is so good. And I think if I was on the call today listening in, I might be telling myself that what's the point of me applying for that role? I'm not going to get it. Yeah, maybe. And I love just what you've shared around, how to unpack that. And first of all, be aware if that is the story, and then why does it happen, and what would be the reality, the difference of that. Thank you for that.
Aileen, I know I'm not one of the panelists, but I just want to add something quickly. I remember you telling me that story about the pilots, and I, a couple of weeks later, was on a plane, and the entire crew were female, so 2 pilots and all of the crew on the plane as well, and they called it out, and the smiles on everybody on the plane's face was amazing. So this is an awesome flight to be on. It's an all-female crew. And I think the fact that they called it out and everyone just smiled was a great way to address that.
That's great. That's really good. And I bet they got there on time.
Yeah, they did. Very smooth landing too.
Yeah. So on the call today, think about that and Penny's advice and the things that you've heard around that, because that could be for you in a different way. Sorry, did you want to add something there, Pen?
I was just going to go to Chi, because Chi's beautiful story of, her going into building and, this bias of, she's not meant to be there because she's a woman. And the reality is that she's broken the mold and she's broken the bias by proving otherwise. Like it's a brilliant example of, women shouldn't be builders, but the reality is, why the hell not?
Yeah.
Women are very good project managers. Look at our home life and how organized we are. But Penny, I really like what you were saying about it's the stories we tell ourselves, because when people ask me generally, has it been challenging for you to be in construction? And I said, I actually have found there's so many positives. So the story that I tell myself and what I really think is true is, hang on, it's really beneficial at times to be the only female in the room, because as when I'm coming to have a hard commercial conversation with you, I'm a small woman having a hard conversation. That is certainly less threatening, and I've seen it with my male colleagues, certainly less threatening than a tall man coming in saying, we need to negotiate on this. So I find that from a negotiation point of view, I can have really robust conversations without getting to a point where it gets a bit too assertive, maybe even aggressive. And the same thing when I used to run sites on the ground. They'd be like little boys in kindergarten, and I'd go to a site and they'd call me, and I've got the boilermaker yelling at the crane operator, because he's like, he's come into my area. He was going to salute over my head, and they'll be fighting, and I'll just go there, and it would just diffuse the situation, because I've got a different energy. I'm a female, I'm here, I'm listening. Oh, okay, I get what you need. Why don't you set up over there? Okay. you really can't slur anyone. So why don't we just work this out? And, you know, it just, as soon as I got to the site that time, I remember, you know, they were actually like yelling like little kids on the phone to me. And I got there and everything just calmed down. And I knew that that's something I can offer, you know, that's something I can offer, a different perspective, going there and just diffusing it. I mean, that's one isolated situation, but I tell myself, well, that's something different that naturally I just offer as having a different perspective. And that adds value. You know, when we talk about diversity, it's not something fluffy, it's real. It's a difference of approach, a difference of opinion that it naturally adds value. And so when I see myself as a woman, not from a trade background, coming into the industry, I think, well, naturally what I offer can add value. And I tell myself that so that when I'm faced with bias and when someone doesn't give me the room or someone doesn't give me the attention that I deserve in that environment, I remind myself, well, this is what I have to offer, you know, and that gives me the resilience to get through to the point where they do see my value, they do see what I have to offer.
No, thank you. That's a great perspective of that. Thanks, Chi. The thing around balancing, as females, we wear a lot of hats. So I know there'll be people on the call that might look at our panel members and think, oh, they've just, you know, they've got it or they're there and maybe it's easy for them. I'm guessing it's not. How do you balance your lives to do the
Balance
things
is
that you
bullshit, Eileen. The word balance is bullshit. So that's the first thing I would say. And I've done a lot of research on this. I think balance sets women up to fail. Okay,
We're getting
because
some good comments on this.
if you think about it, right, in the context of so when you think about balance in your mind, if you close your eyes, what's the thing that immediately comes to your brain? It's like a scale. I think of a scale. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Equilibrium, right? So you think of a scale and you think about the two parts of the scale being equal. The reality is that's not how life works, right? Most women I know now, like you say, they're juggling kids, they're juggling careers, often they're juggling aging parents as well, right? And all of the other bits and pieces that come with life. And the reality is you can't be balanced in every single one of those responsibilities. Most women, you know, it's they say to me, it's basically people are not getting the best of me, they're getting what's left of me. You know, and that is the reality because they're in survival mode, because they're striving for this equilibrium that doesn't exist. I like the word harmony better, and I think harmony is a really nice word to gift yourself, because harmony is about saying, I know in my life, for the season of life that I'm in, right, because life is seasons and demands different things of you at different times, particularly depending on the age of your children. So the season of life that I'm in, I'm clear on what is most important in my life right now, whether that's my career, whether it's my young children, and I'm choosing to give the energy that I have to that thing, knowing that the other things will probably reprioritize at a different, season of life. And it's okay to not be 150% in everything, because the reality is I can't, and all that's going to do is burn yourself out. So I'd say throw balance in the bin and ask yourself, what does harmony look like for me in the day before me? And what is the one most important thing in my life right now, not the 20. Again, you're setting yourself up
really
to fail.
good. That's
Eileen,
great advice.
It reminds me of Manel's presentation that she did in our Women in Hire workshops with
Me too.
you've got the five cups in your life. So you've got your family, you've got your work, you've got your friends, you've got your I think she had health and physical activity and things, and that the whole lot adds up to 100, and you need to figure out where each of them need to be filled at a point in time.
Yeah, good. Some practical things that you can do to help support some of those things that you've got in your life. Chi, I know that you do a number of things and you've got a comment on that, and Kate, keen to hear from you as well. So, Chi.
Yeah, I think I definitely tried to juggle a lot. I'm a bit of an overachiever, but I think something I've learned, especially when I had my children, especially even going from the first to the second, was being willing to accept help and support. I looked around when I had my daughter, and all the men had a level of freedom. Well, that's what I felt. The women were the ones who the buck stopped with them. They were going part-time. They were doing all the sick days. I knew a mum who did 100% of the sick days, even though she was part-time. So basically she was zero time. at work. And I looked around all of that and I tried to absorb all of that. No one had cleaners, no one had nannies. And then I was trying to live my life the way, I'd set out for myself, and I was general manager at the time. And I kept on having those roles, and I tried to fit into their box my life, and one time my sister just like, why are you cleaning on the weekend and then doing all this stuff and then trying to live your life the way that you're living it, and she just told me I was crazy. I was like, and my husband doesn't even look at our finances, wouldn't care at all if we got a cleaner. That's not even the problem. I'm the problem, so I got myself a cleaner, and life got a little bit easier. And so I definitely agree with you that it's every stage of life, because it ebbs and flows. I went from, newborn kids, then I went to 2 in childcare, and then now I'm finally at, 2 in school, and it's allowed me different levels of freedom, but I've got to keep finding harmony. Yesterday, I went a little bit, I overcommitted myself, and I went, all right, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to work out, then I'm going to go to my kids' celebration of learning, and then I'm going to come back and see my kids, and then I'm going to go to this parent drinks as well. And then by the time it was 6:30, I'm like, I can't do this parent drinks. I'm tired. I got to go to work the next day, And I just gave myself the license. My first thought was like, oh, but the other parents will be there. I won't be there. I won't connect with the parents. I won't be building my son's community. And I was like, Chi, calm down, Chi. It's going to be all right. And so I cancelled the prep drinks, and I let myself go to sleep early so I could be fresh for the day, fresh for you guys.
Thank you.
And I felt, in harmony, and I gave myself the permission that you are not a less of a perfect parent if you don't go to this prep drinks. You'll have another chance to connect, look after yourself, go to bed early, and I feel really good today.
Good on you, Chi. And Kate, I could see you doing some noddings and going into your head around your experiences. What would you add to that?
Well, I think Chi and I are at a very similar stage of life. And as you talked about, Penny, the seasons. So I've just hit this season where I've come out of my daycare era. And anyone that's in the thick of it right now, I hear you, I see you. It is rough. And those years are, and I also parented through COVID era as well, which a lot of us did too. So coming out the other side of that now, 7 years later, from having my first child is a real interesting time. And it comes with different challenges, and they've got different needs and after school things and all the things that go on. But I think the main thing for me is, well, I don't have a stay-at-home wife. I have my darling husband who's co-parents with me. We're in this thing called life together. But what I see a lot is not everyone has that. And that's where that real imbalance comes in, and sharing, here's so many articles about sharing the mental load as well, that we tend to carry more of things like just simple things like there's a birthday party on the weekend. My husband won't have even thought about the fact that we need to get a present for this kid for the birthday party. But 2 weeks ago, my brain thought about it and sorted it out, and it's sitting on the hall table. Things like that, they're small, but someone's got to do them. And sort of that delineation of duties, and to the point Chi made about the cleaner, I only got a cleaner last year. In my head I decided it was entitled, which is ridiculous. And I know not everyone has the means to have cleaners, but it was one of those things where we went through life and went, what can I outsource here? What is not a good spend of my time? And for all of us is actually thinking of your time as, almost think of it as an hourly rate. What I'm spending time on these tasks that I could be spending with my children. If I've only got limited amount of time at night time or on the weekends, I don't want to be cleaning toilets. I want to be out with my children and enjoying life. So it's, harmony is an interesting word. I really like that one, Penny, as well. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves as women. But what is interesting is seeing, like I talk about this with my mum all the time. So I was raised by a stay-at-home mum in the 80s and into the early 90s. We didn't have access to daycare and things like that back then. So she's like, I couldn't go back to my career like you have been able to do. So each generation, we do improve this somewhat, I guess, but we're the generation of trying to do it all at once and have it all at the same time. And this notion of, we've got, particularly, if I look at Chi and myself, we're both in these senior exec roles and raising these kids at the same time. And we're both doing it with, we've got another parent, and there's another parent in this equation. It's not just on us as mums to raise these children. So, and I think that's where I'm really passionate as an employer as well, is making sure that when we talk about flexibility, that it's flexibility for both genders. It's not just about enabling Chi and I to work flexibly or come back from parental leave part-time and things like that. It's actually enabling some of the fathers in our organisations to do school pickups and drop-offs and go to the school concert and things like that. So it's across the board, thinking about how we view the balance and the harmony and how we support that as employers and within our teams.
Yeah, so much. I mean, we could have a whole further
That's a whole
conversation
other
on this
topic.
point. Yeah, it's fantastic and I know that I have met across the journey in Sal, as we go along Women in Hire, we've met some incredible women who don't have that other person at home. They may be.
I was just thinking that, Eileen.
Yeah. Penny, do you want to sort of make any comments around that? Because I think
as a single parent, and that's what's coming up for me. I when my son was little, I did have a partner to outsource or even delegate to in terms of decision load. But from the age of 4, I've been a single parent. My son's now 15, so I'm at a very different stage. And they say, when your kids get to your teen, you move. I love the idea you move from manager to consultant, which I love. But again, I imagine there must be many women in your industry that are single parents, and how the hell do you balance it when there's no one else, and often not only single parents, they're also in complex, separated relationships where they're not cohesive, which creates a whole other stress. And, when you don't have someone to default to do that 6-day pickup, like, she was talking about, or the buck stops with you. I mean, just even having an understanding or an appreciation of the load that a woman as a single parent carries is huge.
Yeah. And so many people will say, it's not the right time to apply for that role, but it's the right time to tell people that you've got an interest in that role as well. I think have the conversation.
I agree with you, but I also say sometimes we need to think as well, and I think I'm sure Kay has some perspectives on this, think more creatively as well. Like if we want things to change, the structure of jobs needs to change, right? Because especially at leadership levels, and I've talked about this for years now, right? So we want equality, but the way that jobs are structured at the most senior levels predominantly, right, still is based on, it has not changed, it is based on a male who has got a wife at home full time, like in the 1960s, who supports him in doing everything while he travels the world and does his executive role. That is how these roles were shaped and structured. I mean, how many job shares do you see in your industry at the moment at an executive level? I'm guaranteeing, and it's not just your industry, it's hardly any, right? And so if we want this to change, we need to think more creatively about how these jobs are structured, because if there's one thing I know, if you want someone to do a job and do it well, make it a mum, because they get in there and they get stuff done, right? Because they don't have a lot of time. So I think we need to think about job structures. And I'd also say, when you say now's not the right time, I definitely think you've got to consider, taking on additional responsibility and things like that. But just because you take on more responsibility doesn't mean you have to work 24/7.
Correct.
For me, it's always been about outcomes, not about hours, right? And I think that's how we have to look at these jobs. And I see so many women, and I had an experience myself when I just had my son. I came back to work. He was 6 months old and I was working 3 days a week. And my boss at the time was quite traditional, and he sat down and did my development plan with me and said, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I'm ready for my next promotion. I'm up for it. I'm 3 days a week. I'm still capable of doing a more senior job. And he turned around, he literally laughed in my face and said, if you think you're going to get promoted working part-time, he goes, you need to check yourself, not going to happen. And I was working in oil and gas at the time. Now, I told a friend of mine who rung me not long after and could see I was a bit upset. And she said, what's going on? And I just sort of said, oh, look, this is what's happened. I needed to recalibrate my story. And I believed what he said. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to get this opportunity because now's not the right time. It's clearly, they've made that very clear. I'm not capable whilst I'm part-time. She was an executive, and a week later I got a call. She was over in Perth, and basically they offered me a full expat job part-time at a more senior level and sent me and my family over to Perth on what they call the golden ticket in oil and gas to do an amazing job. part-time to show that it is possible, and we do need to look at the way jobs are structured differently. And you should have seen the look on his face when I told him.
That's amazing. That is so true. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks very much. All righty. So I'm conscious that there will be lots of questions that that people want to ask, and that we've got half an hour of our call left. But I do want to ask the question around support. Where have you got your support from? And where have you given, how have you given support? So the thing around support. And the next question that I want to ask, so I'll get you thinking about too, is really, if you were to give some advice to your younger self, what might that advice be? So let's start maybe with support. Kate, for you, where does your support come from for you? Where do you get your support?
In a lot of ways for me, it's actually other women. I've really believe in helping other women rise, and we do it together. So it's not about, it's not about one gender rising above another gender. It's not about that. It's around who you're taking along with you, and you don't have to be in a leadership role to be taking someone along for the ride with you. So looking around, if you find yourself in a room, who's missing from that room that should be in that room? If there's a decision being made and you're like, hang on, why isn't this person in the room? Get them in the room. There's little things that you can do even if you're not in a leadership role. And I think, don't wait until you're into that leadership role to make other women rise. And that's kind of, there's a couple of key people, including some men, that are, have helped me get to where I am today. And, certainly 10 years ago when I took on this particular role, very inexperienced, very green, and, certainly a lot younger and different, very different in terms of how I approach things to today. But yeah, a lot of that was because of the women that supported me along that, and men who supported me to be successful. So look around, who can you bring along with you?
Yeah, that's great, Kate. I love that you just the little things, like in a room, thinking about who else should be in this room, who should be taking a seat in this room. So you've been invited to rooms more recently where you've no doubt learned a lot more about the industry and about certain things. And I know we've had conversations about when you're invited to a room. Do you want to just share your point on that, Sally?
Yeah, I've said it a couple of times, and some of you that have been in Women in Hire may have already heard it, but if someone invites you to a room, they've invited you there for a reason. So they want to know your thoughts, they want to know your opinion. So I guess just keep that in the back of your mind. Sometimes it is hard to speak up, but that you have been invited there because your opinion and your perspective is wanted. So give it.
Take the seat.
Yeah,
give the don't.
And the first time will be hard, but it gets easier.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Chi, for you, in terms of support, either the way in which you have been given it, or the way you give it yourself. Do you want to make any comment on that?
Sure. I think there's been a number of people that have supported me across my career path and probably continue to do that. I think no matter what, we always need a level of sponsorship. And I can think of that, as recently as coming to RPM. But who was probably a standout for me was the director, Steve, who was like director and co-founder of Premier Cranes. And, he brought me into the business. He'd known me, we'd worked together in like structural steel for, about 5 years before that. So we just knew each other in the industry. And he said, come to the business. And I was like, cool, what do you want me to do? And, he said, oh, you're a high performer. I want you to help me build a high performing team. And I didn't think of myself as a leader. I didn't think of, sure, I'd been a general manager, but I hadn't run big teams. I hadn't thought of someone who could lead, connect, inspire people. I was like, sure, I'll do that. I don't know if I can, but sure. And, we spent quite a lot of time planning out how we're going to scale the business, because we went from about 10 mil to 50 mil in like 4 years. So it was a pretty big scale. And we got to this point, right? And he'd been with a business coach for a year with his business partner. And he's like, Chi, we're ready to roll this out. So we worked for about 3-4 months on how we're going to do it. And we're going to start putting people on, and we're going to really scale. And at that time, I was about, 35 weeks pregnant, you know, and so he was like, cool. So I want to change your title from general manager to chief operating officer so you can really own the next level of your growth. Basically, I want to promote you. And it was like, no worries that there's this baby that's just about to happen. No worries about that. Let's ignore that. Let's keep going. And I knew that he knew me, and he knew that, sure, on the surface, this looks very NQR. You know, this chick's about to have a baby, and then you're going to promote her into this role. That doesn't seem quite right. But I knew he knew me, and he was like, well, she's just going to figure her shit out. She's going to make it happen. And so I'm investing in her. And at that time, you know, even now, not all subcontractor businesses have parental leave. So he said, we don't have this in your contract, but it doesn't feel right. How much paid parental leave should I give you? What do you think I should give you? And asked me the question. And I actually
can we
felt quite
name
nervous.
this man? Can you tell us his name? This man needs to be called out.
Yeah. So he actually asked me, what do you think is fair? And I, leading into even though we were such good friends, even leading into it, I was like, oh, I should ask him, but I just couldn't bring up the courage to do it, even though we're such good friends. I was like, oh, but you know, I didn't negotiate in my contract, so you know, I can't ask for this. But then when he put it on the table, I was like, well, you've got my back. You just promoted me, told me I've got paid parental leave, and you just said to me, come back whenever. I'm like, okay, but when is whenever? And he's like, whatever suits you. And I was like, okay. But he knew how much I loved the business, and I came back after 2 months, actually. He gave me 4 months paid, but I was like, no, I love this too much. I'm coming back. But I came back on my terms. You know, I used that money to pay for a nanny. I went through sleep school. So kid was all good. And I came back and I was like so excited. I'm like, going to hire these people, going to do these things. And I'll never forget it. And I believe that I contribute that value back to the business, because the way that it made me feel, the way it empowered me, the like even forever, but the way it made me feel about the business was like, this is a part of me and my journey. This is what they've offered me, and I want to offer it back, you know. And we just achieved so much together after. And he was like, he even said, you know, after I came back, he was like, oh, you've really like come in. I was like, I'm CEO now. I've had my baby. Let's get to it, you know. And
good on you.
just that's something that will always resonate with me. You know, I'm moved on. I'm an RPM hire. We've got a similar great culture where, you know, Ash really invests in the team. You know, we've got, I actually saw one of them actually on maternity leave, but she's joined this call. And you know, we having that long-term view, like for employees to have that long-term view and invest in us, and for us as employees to invest back into giving that value back, that to me get part of us achieving that balance for women, but then also in turn for men, is when we can make our careers part of our life, when employers feed into what that co-investment means, that's when you can get the best out of someone, you know. And I feel like that point of sponsorship really changed my journey. And so for me, trying to give back now, you know, there are women in our organization who, you know, are talking openly, which I think is really nice, talking openly about when they're planning to have babies, you know. And I'll sometimes have a conversation. Hey, what are you thinking about? You know, what would you like as support when you have a baby, you know? Or I'll say things like, hey, these are some of the ways these are some of the tools I use to help me work as I was having children, to just not make it a taboo. Like, yeah, you're going to have a baby one day, but you didn't fall off the planet, you know. There are ways to come back, and you can come back however you want. You don't have to come back the way I came back, but it's not you've gone off the deep end because you've had a child. It's just part of your journey. And when I say child, it could be any point in life. You know, people can go through illnesses, they can go through family hardship. Just to know that that's a season or a point in their life, and you didn't suddenly lose the value that you've, number one, achieved to date, or the value that you can contribute in the future. You know, that's what the sponsorship I've had has really taught me. And I want to be able to help people that work with me on that journey as well.
Yeah, that's great. Penny, for you. I remember meeting you, Penny, by engaging you on a LinkedIn post that you put up about being in an airport and you got a call about a TED talk. Do you mind recalling and sharing that? Because I think there's something really powerful in that about someone believing in you and then you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to call out Maureen's comment in the chat, because I couldn't agree more. And I know when we had the pre-chat to this session as a group, just acknowledging the fact that, yeah, many of my best supporters have been as well. And Maureen's called that out. And I know that many of the women, Chi and Kate, also said the same thing. You know, there are so many great male advocates out there, like Chi's example. And I think we should acknowledge and honour them. And I definitely experienced that in my career. And this story is an example of that. So one of the things that happened to me, and this is an example of saying yes to things before you're ready, but equally having people out there that know what you want because you've told them, like I said, going out there and ask for that no. So I was fortunate enough early in my entrepreneurial journey, my second career phase, to meet the curator of TEDx Melbourne. So I always, like, who doesn't dream of doing a TED talk, right? It's like, what a great opportunity. So anyway, I told him from the day that I met him, I was like, you know what? I'm going to get on that TED stage. I want to do a TED talk. And I know how hard it is to get on that stage. They are rigorous and ruthless in who they put on there, right? So, and you have to be pretty good at what you do. So anyway, we had a number of conversations over the years, and I found myself over in San Francisco for some work. I flew back. I was standing at the carousel, ready to collect my bag. And this was probably about 4 years after I told John that I wanted to do a TED talk. And my phone rang, and I answered the phone, and he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm at the carousel." He said, "I need a favour." He goes, "TEDx Melbourne is next week. We've just had one of the speakers pull out, and you're the only person I know I can put on the stage that could deliver a TED talk in a week. Will you do it?" And I was like, oh, shit. I wasn't expecting that. And I completely didn't feel ready. And so I said, "John, I don't feel ready, but it's a hell yes." Because
that's
this is
awesome.
the thing that I have learned, right? If we, and particularly women, again, if we come back to that people-pleasing perfectionist, like that lives, and I'm a recovering one, often we will say, I'm not ready yet because I haven't, the talk's not 100%, or it's not perfect, or I haven't been on a stage like that before, so I'm not ready. If you wait to be ready, you will never have these opportunities, right? You have to do them when you're half ready, because the reality is you won't say yes otherwise. And I got on that stage a week later, and that was like 6 years ago now. And that TED talk was the greatest gift ever. I still to this day get work out of it because it's a gift that keeps on giving. It's such a credibility stamp. And I didn't feel ready, and I said yes anyway. And I would encourage many or all of the women on this call, if you don't feel ready, often I think that's a really good indicator that you should start putting yourself out there and telling people that it's something that you want to do. Because as Kate said earlier, rarely do you ever recruit anyone into a job that is fully competent, because you don't want them in the job fully competent and having ticked all the boxes, because they'll be bored in 5 minutes and then they'll be looking for the next move. You want someone that's going to grow into it. And the only way that you can realise these opportunities is by not feeling ready and giving yourself permission to grow into it.
Oh, it's fantastic. Thank you so
much. It's
interesting,
Aileen, because when we first met to talk about what we wanted to get out of this webinar today, we were talking about the topic being balancing the scales, and you asked me, what do you think the biggest issue is for women in our industry in balancing the scales? And I thought about it for a minute, and then we spoke about it, and I think the answer was ourselves. I think that the biggest issue is that consciously or not, we do hold ourselves back. I think everyone would be given an opportunity if you asked for it.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And if you get a no, then you're getting closer to a yes, in another way. Thank you so much for that. Let's open it up to questions. I'm sure, I've got questions, so I'm going to keep mine because I'll speak to these ladies in another time. But let's get the questions happening. So they're going to come up in the chat room. Is that right?
Yeah, most of the stuff in the chat so far has been comments, which are amazing comments.
So let's get some questions. Amazing. Let's pop some questions into the chat room. You can either ask a question of the panel, or you can ask a question of an individual inside the panel. I know you'll agree with me. Our panel have been fantastic, and I know they're very open to answer any questions. And then panel, when we come back before we leave you today, it'll be, what advice would you give to your younger self? And so let's check to see.
The first question is here, so it's Penny. What should we be teaching our children?
Right.
Not a big question at all.
I always get asked about children, and I laugh because my sister's sitting next to me, and if you asked her what I was like as a parent, she would probably say very free-spirited. I am unique in the way that I parent. Look, there's a couple of things that have worked for me. And like I say, I have a sample size of 1, which is not statistically representative. So I am not an expert on children. But there's a couple of things. I'm very curious about AI at the moment and how that is going to impact our future, to the point where I'm actually partners with a company out of Silicon Valley where we're using AI to help people be more human, which is very interesting. And so one of the things I think a lot about with a 15-year-old is what is work going to look like for him in the future, and will he even need to work? Okay. And so one of the things that I'm very curious about as he sits here and starts having all these conversations at school around how to work out what his career is and, start making decisions because what you choose in VC is going to matter. I just go bullshit. It's not going to matter, right? Because they're still preparing our kids for traditional roles that likely won't exist in the future. So one of the things that I think in terms of what we should be teaching our children is experimentation. Like experiment, try loads of different things, right? Be open. There is no right one path. There could be a million right paths to where you're going. And the only way that they can work out and find what brings them joy, what brings them meaning and the things that they like is through experimentation. And partnered with that, experimentation requires failure. And I think failure is one of the most underrated things in our society, because the more we fail, the more resilient we become. And we are less resilient as a society than ever. So actually encouraging your children to fail. And what I mean by that is not trying, actually encouraging your kids to say, this is something you have no experience in. So why don't we experiment and let's see what happens? And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't matter, because the greatest gift is we'll get to learn something from that experiment, and we can use that learning into whatever the next thing is that you choose you want to experiment with. That is what growth is. And so that's what I'm a big fan of, teaching them experimentation, cultivating their curiosity. So one of the things I try, and it's extremely difficult, I think with our kids, we want to fix them. It's all about how do we fix them? How do we alleviate the pain and suffering? Because that's what we innately want to do as parents, but actually stepping back and saying, well, you know what? I'm not here to fix. I'm more here to guide, and giving them the space to make their own decisions within constraints and boundaries, and permission to do that, rather than trying to do it for them or trying to fix the problem, giving them the space to decide how they want to fix the problem. I think these are skills that are underrated, but are going to be really important in the future, because adaptability is going to be critical. I think we're going to see some massive shifts in the context of the workforce, if even half of what they're predicting is true. So anything that cultivates experimentation, curiosity, and resilience is going to be extremely powerful.
Love it. Love it. Thank you. Any other questions coming in, Sal?
Not yet. Come on, don't be shy. Oh, you got to thank you for your answer though, Penny.
Yes.
One thing I would
Okay.
say as well, Sal, is
Yep.
if there's people listening on this call that are sitting there going, I'd love to ask a question, but maybe I'm scared to ask the question, I would say you're the person that needs to ask the question. Like, this is your opportunity to shine and put your voice in the room. So please do it. That's what we've been talking about today. This is your opportunity to get rejected, get that first no, that act of micro bravery.
So we have got a question now. Does it ever happen to you that someone calls you honey, sweetie, or darling? I find it condescending. Does it annoy you? If so, how do you make them aware that it might not be a good way to address someone without saying nasty things such as, don't you dare call me honey?
Good question. This is just generally for the panel. So if you have any views on that. Who wants to take that one?
There's a lot of smiles.
There's a lot of smiles.
Smirks.
Kate, have you ever been called honey, doll?
Not recently, but yes. I think it's really, I mean, obviously, if you say don't dare call me honey, that's a very, I wouldn't be surprised if that was your reaction and response and what your body is responding in that moment. But it's thinking about how you can channel that instead of being quite as ragey into something constructive. So what I said earlier around turning that into a learning moment, in terms of, I'm not sure if you're aware, but you just call me darling. Not your darling. Can you please call me my name? It's Kate. I still was a little bit condescending in that, but it was around turning it into what is it about the behaviour that I'm actually calling out as well.
Yeah. That's good. Thanks, Kate. Thank you.
So there's another question now. My first manager in the industry told me that women have to work 110% compared to men. This was in 2005. Do people still think this is the case?
Oh, good question. Okay, so that's probably an industry one. Chi, what from your perspective, what do you think?
I guess I'm a bit of an overachiever, so I don't know if I'm the right person to answer this. I never really thought about a man or woman thing, but I've told myself that I guess when you do put your efforts in, it's rewarded. So I guess I come from that you can learn anything and you can achieve anything, and therefore there is no ceiling. But in order to do that, you do need to work for that. But I guess my way of reframing it, because I see a lot of people who work really hard and then they can get burnt out if they don't get the opportunity they want, or they don't get the promotion they're looking for. So I sort of reframe it as like, I try to check in with myself once a while and go, I'm working really hard, but I'm working for me. Am I still working for me as well as the company, or am I working for the company? So I think that we should see work and what we put into our career as an investment in ourselves. And if we're no longer investing in ourselves alongside the company, then we need to figure out a way to resolve that. So I don't see it. I think in order to be really successful in a role, there has to be a feeling that there's a personal investment. So it doesn't become about what is the workload, but about am I in the right role where I can be successful, where I can grow? And then it's not really comparison of men or women. In our exec team, we have both men and women, and I wouldn't say that it's been about anyone has to work harder or less hard or more hard from a gender point of view. I think it comes down to overall success. And so for me to make it sustainable for myself personally, I try to think about like, I'm investing myself, I want to do this. And if I don't want to, what is the way, how am I changing my position or my role in order to achieve that?
That's good. Thank you.
And I did see your post today, Chi, with 50% of the exec team at RPM Hire being women. So way to go, team.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining each one of those women has a true voice at the table. That's fantastic.
So we have another question here, which
you.
is quite a specific one. In regards to the parental leave subject, is it the panel's opinion that most hire companies should have this written into their contracts?
Kate, can you lead us with that one?
It's probably more of a policy at a policy level and an employment contract level that you would tend to see it in most organisations. So it's not necessarily in an employment contract. It would just be as per the Fair Work Act requirements, which is unpaid 12 months parental leave. However, in terms of if your employer offers anything over and above the Fair Work, it would be in a policy probably on your intranet.
I would say, so with RPM and I came into the business, we already had a paid paternity leave policy. So we think it's I'm pretty sure it's the primary caregiver, but we offer over and above, what is industry standard. And I feel that so my short answer is yes, I believe it's something that employers should provide. However, I think it works for us at RPM because we've got a pretty long-term investment lens. Because I've also seen, like, I've got friends who will say comments like, oh, I'm just waiting to have my baby with this company, get the parental leave, and then I'll leave. And when I hear that, as I see myself as an employer, because, I'm working at exec level in a business, and that really hurts me because it erodes the foundation of equality. Like companies are also trying to do the right thing, so I think, yes, companies should have parental leave policies, but it's only sustainable for companies if both employees and employers have a long-term lens. When I think about my parental leave at Premier Cranes, it's like I was there for 6 years. A 4-month investment for 6 years of having a general manager exec level role it is financially a moot point. But if I was to take 2-3 rounds and then leave and not provide sustaining value, that's a real cost to the business. So I think if companies can get to that point and feel that investment can be achieved, then I think yes, we should offer that over and above. And I'm pretty sure that's why RPM implemented that in our company policy, because we've got that long range view. It's 4 months out of 5 years, it's 4 months out of 8 years. Who cares? And I'd love for women to have that wherever they work, because it's whether it's men or women. My husband gets paid parental leave at his work, and he's been there 17 years. Okay. And during that time, he's provided enough value that 4 months, drop in the ocean, you know? So, and that was such a benefit for me coming to work, knowing that my husband was at home with the baby, bonding, becoming the father that he wanted to be, being paid so our financial position wasn't being affected, and then for me being able to work. So we've got that double benefit. I've had that opportunity, he's had that opportunity. So I think if we can have get to the right point, then yes, we should have parental leave policies that are over and above sort of what the government provides.
Yeah, thank you.
So there's
Penny,
another question now. Sorry, I had to dip out for a bit, so apologies if this has been covered, but best tip for dealing with the boys club?
I'd love to hear from everyone on this one.
Certainly, I've been around some boys clubs in my career. I think one of the things that one of the main things you can probably do is you can't control others, but you can control how you respond to others. And sometimes it's not a club you actually want to be part of anyway. Make your own club, basically. But yeah, it can be challenging, particularly if you're experienced. I'm not sure the context of this, whether it's at a leadership level or if you're talking about at sort of that next level down, but it can certainly cause, some cultural challenges as an organization. I've seen it play out, and it's the old, what we were talking about earlier around behavior that you can, what you walk past, you condone. So if you see something, say something. It's all around the respect at work behaviors that are legislated in this country. There's been some significant changes in that in the last 6 months as well. So I think there's that I'm really sad to hear it still occurs in 2026, this notion, and, probably comes with jobs for the boys as well. That's another one that's kind of linked to that boys club, but it's really around, I guess, what you're prepared to do to dismantle it and create your own, work through with that business and that culture, if it is part of the culture, or get yourself out of there if that's not something you want to be part of as well.
Thanks for that, Kate. We have got a couple of minutes left, so actually you probably have 1 minute each to tell me what advice you would give to your younger self. Penny, so your 49-year-old self, what advice would you give to your younger self?
You are capable of so much more than you realise.
Oh, I love that.
And I see this in every woman. If someone had said to me 10 years ago when I left my exec role at Shell, that I would have done half of what I've done, from TED Talks to speaking at Google in Silicon Valley, writing for Harvard Business Review. I got a book publishing deal, like crazy stuff, right? I've worked with pretty much every major corporate that there is in every industry. I would have said you were nuts. I literally would have said there's no way that's possible. And I see this in women all the time. You are capable of so much more than you realise.
Oh, I love it. Thank you for that. And thank you from your younger self, Penny. Thanks. Kate.
Probably get over your imposter syndrome. You deserve to be there. You've earned it. Yeah. You're the expert, as Penny would say. And just get out of your way and get over yourself. I think I spent a lot of my energy back in particularly my late 20s, when I found myself in this really senior role, in a room full of suits, middle-aged white men. And I spent a lot of energy, and I call it energy because it was a lot of energy trying to be perfect, and that competitive streak. I guess I've got to win this. I've got to nail this. Whereas if I actually channeled some of that energy into just getting on with it and believing in myself, I still got where I needed to get to, but it just, I would have maybe had less burnout. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate. Chi.
I wish I could have told my younger self that to find that balance or that tipping point where, being resilient and going through a hard situation doesn't also mean enduring and accepting it. And I was in a role for too long, I would say, and I put up with a lot, and it built the foundation of where I am today, but I didn't need to put up with that for as long as I did, so deciding where your boundaries are, being true to yourself and going, okay, I've done this, I've gotten to this point, but do I really need to put up with this, and I think that's part of, I don't know if it applies to all women, but just, trying to please, trying to accommodate, and I did that, and I got to that breaking point, and I was like, hang on, there's nothing in it for me anymore, and then I did leave, but reflecting on it, I probably went through a lot that I didn't need to.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for that. Well, I know, Sal, you probably want to say a word, but I can't thank you enough to our panel. I think you've been amazing. You've really shared a lot about and gave us some tips and techniques and stories and being really honest and authentic. And so I know that there may be some people who are on the call that haven't asked a question, but if they can reach out maybe through Sal to have that question answered by you. Can't thank you enough. Happy International Women's Day to you again. And we so look forward to seeing you again soon. Amanda and Lisa and Sal, how cool is this? How lucky are we to be doing what we do? And thank you to everyone on the call. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Take these tips. You know, I know myself, I've taken things away. I love thinking about harmony as opposed to balance, to embrace those values as they are, and just to, you know, to feel uncomfortable, do the micro moments of bravery. I love that. So there's many, many more moments. So thank you very much. Sal, do you want to close as the last?
I will keep it super short. There are thank yous galore coming through in the chat. So and Aileen and I had a vision, and this could not have been couldn't have been better. So thank you, thank you. That was all I would say. And HRIA is always here for all of you on the session. So please, if there are any questions you do want to get in touch with any of these people, reach out. I'm sure I can. I'm sure that they would all be willing to have a chat.
Yeah, fantastic.
And
thanks
happy
again,
International
everyone.
Women's Day. Enjoy Sunday.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
See you guys.
See you later.
Thank you. Did you want to hang back?